Hello, and welcome to CheersToFearYT, where you take horror films and turn them into drinking games. We're your two hosts. I'm Alex.
And I'm Tucker. Today we will be making a drinking game for Psycho, directed by the legendary Alfred Hitchcock. The writers for the movie were Joseph Stefano and Robert Bloch. Robert Bloch is the person who wrote the book. That's right, before Psycho was a movie, it started out as a book.
In Psycho, Marianne Crane is put in charge of a large chunk of money by her boss. She then decides to make an out-of-character decision and steal the money to live comfortably with her boyfriend, Sam Loomis. No, not that Sam Loomis. This Sam Loomis.
While she constantly tries to avoid the police, she stops by a hotel called Bates Motel. She then starts to become friends with the young owner, Norman Bates. Norman's mother, Norma, has started to notice that he is taking a liking to the young lady, and Mother is not a fan of this at all.
From here on out, we will be talking about spoilers for the movie. But honestly, most people have already heard of Psycho and the two main twists that appear in the film. But regardless, we will always warn our audience prior to the film. Without further ado, let's move on to the discussion for the rules.
So the first rule we have for this drinking game is, of course, death. If you see somebody die, you gotta take a drink. And this movie has one of the most iconic deaths of all of film, really. Like, obviously, the shower scene where she gets stabbed.
Yeah. Spoilers were just above 10 seconds. If you didn't skip it, that's on you. And if you don't fucking know of it, I'm honestly quite surprised.
Yeah.
But yeah, one of the most iconic deaths in all of film, I'd say, not even horror. I mean, obviously deaths you have to incorporate with horror, though.
Yeah. And with this movie, we had a surprisingly low tally for deaths with only 2. I mean, I expected it because I've obviously seen Psycho.
Yeah.
It's an older movie, but I think this might be the lowest number of deaths we've had so far.
I think so. Maybe one of the Conjuring movies, but that's really all I can think of. And of course, our second rule that we always have in any Cheers to Fears video anyways, if somebody screams, cries, or yells, you take a sip.
Yeah, and this is pretty much the same deal as the last rule. There's really low number of sips in this one, especially for this rule being one of our higher rules in general, like for most of our games. This one only has 7 in this movie. And so yeah, that's a pretty low one for screams, cries, and yells.
And I guess going off of that, there is some very iconic screams in this movie as well.
Yeah.
Like in the shower scene. In even at the very end when you find out the mother twist. But yeah, I feel like the Vera Miles scream had more of an impact than Janet Leigh. Just especially compare them back to back, and I feel like you'll agree with me a little bit.
I get what point you're saying, especially because that's the reveal that Norman Bates is actually his mother, and actually his mother's dead already.
Yeah.
So we don't know that in the shower scene, so we kind of just, on first watch, you assume that it's his mother doing this killing.
Yeah.
And it is still an iconic scream, don't get me wrong. We even use it in our title sequence, but yeah, I do kind of agree that the second scream hits harder and it's even more visceral.
Yeah, it's more blood-curdling for sure.
Yeah, exactly.
Just everything along with it, just the twist that people didn't know about, the reveal of it, I feel has just such a big impact.
Yeah. So now we come on to our third rule, which is the highest count in all of our rules at 33. And that rule is you have to drink whenever you hear somebody say mother.
There isn't a lot to really say about it. Obviously, if there's rules just based on a single saying mother, for example, as this one is, there's not a lot to say, but it carried the movie for drinks as far as drinking goes for sure.
Yeah, absolutely.
Do you go out with friends?
Well, a boy's best friend is his mother.
So let's move on to rule number 4, which is you take a sip whenever anybody or somehow it's mentioned that Marion stole the money, whether it's just panning to the newspaper that she buried the money in, anything like that. And that comes to 12 sips, which is the second highest. So you know that this drinking game is going to be a fairly low total.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And fun fact about the money in this movie, it was $40,000 at that time. So in today's currency, I guess, that equals to about $360,000. So it just gives you an idea on how much she actually stole.
Yeah.
Well, I ain't about to kiss off $40,000. I'll get it back, and if any of it's missing, I'll replace it with her fine, soft flesh.
Anyways, our next rule is whenever you see taxidermy on screen. For this one, it wasn't that high, just like every other rule. It was only 7 sips.
I feel like it was only in a few scenes too, as far as I recall. So it wasn't really super prominent in the movie. Just whenever people in Norman Bates the
lobby
hotel
or
lobby,
office or whatever.
steady, office, whatever you want to call
Yeah.
it. In saying that, a lot of the birds that were stuffed were intelligent birds, which is weird to point out, besides the pheasant that was behind Norman. So it could be like alluding to the fact that he has kind of a split personality, or the fact that Norman's stupid. I don't know what it represents.
Maybe it could be representing that he is super smart, but also kind of oblivious to certain things around him, you know?
Yeah, it could be just the fact that he's naive about the whole situation.
Yeah.
Like, about his mother's death and everything like that.
Yeah.
That's my guess anyways. So moving on to the next rule we have is, if you see the knife that Norman Bates wants to kill somebody with, you drink. He only tries to kill people 3 times in the movie, so that's just 3 sips.
Yeah. It's pretty basic rule, but it's involving something so iconic and I guess important to the plot.
Yeah.
So that's why we included it, and yeah, it was only 3 like he said, and we only see it when Norma is trying to kill somebody. So
Yeah.
So now going on to rule number 7, it's whenever somebody's on the phone, you have to take a sip. Again, it's another pretty basic rule, and it only happens 4 times in the movie. There's not a lot to say about the rule, honestly. It's pretty straightforward.
Yeah, it was almost hard to make some drinking rules for this one. I guess the movie's just almost so simple, to say the least. They don't really rely on a lot of tropes such as a lot of other horror movies do, like death, screams, cries, and yells.
Yeah.
They don't really rely on a lot of things.
Yeah, it's simple but effective, but that's why it is kind of difficult sometimes to make rules.
Yeah. So next rule we have is whenever anybody enters a Bates house uninvited, you take a sip. This only happened 3 times in the movies, and honestly, this can make up a good chunk of people that deserve the Darwin Award.
Yeah, there wasn't really a lot of stupid decisions in the movie overall, and we'll get to the Darwin Awards eventually, but this was one thing in particular that earned at least one person a spot on the Darwin Awards.
Well, it's just like, if you think somebody's killed in the house, why would you go into the house without any sort of backup?
And without a warrant, too.
Yeah, that too. Just destroy a crime scene.
So our second last rule is if Norman is talking with his mother, you take a sip. And it only happens 3 times in the movie, but again, it's so integral to the plot that we had to include it. And it's an interesting rule, especially if you know what the twist is.
Yeah.
Even when he's talking to his mother, it's not technically his mother. So
Yes.
that's interesting to know in hindsight, you know, after you've seen the movie already.
One more interesting thing about this, that I guess that makes the rule more interesting itself. Apparently, there were 3 different actors that played Norma Bates.
Okay.
In saying that, I'm not sure if all of them were the voice actors, or it could have been some that were just silhouettes acting in place. Even if you want to count Anthony Perkins as technically a Norma Bates actor, like if you really wanted to stretch it.
Yeah.
But it's just weird to see 3 people credited with that role.
Well, especially because you never get to see her, actually.
Yeah, you never see a person.
You never see a living being of her.
Yeah, and yet she has 3 credited roles in the credits, or 3 people credited as her.
Yeah.
Mother! Oh, God! Mother! Blood!
So finally, we have one last rule. Rule number 10 is if you see any clues to Marion's disappearance, you take a sip. Again, not too frequently in the film. This happens 6 times.
It's a running theme at this point.
Yeah.
And this is a rule that can kind of be left up to interpretation.
Yeah.
It's more or less depending on how you see it in the film. So you might end up with more than 6 sips. You might end up with less, but again, for us, we ended up with 6. And that's all the rules that we have for Psycho. And this was one of the easiest drinking games by far, up to this point on our channel at least. It gave us a total of 80 sips, which is super underwhelming, and it only equals a little over 2.5 standard 12-ounce cans.
Yeah.
That obviously being based off our 30 sip per can scale. So yeah, it was very simple. It's basically like you're casually drinking while watching it.
Like, there was like a very long period. I think in the first 30 minutes of the movie, there were 7 sips. Just that in general is basically nothing. That's less than casually drinking, I'd say.
Yeah, I agree.
To finish like what, less than a third of a can in 30 minutes.
Yeah, it's pretty rough. Rough for the wrong reasons. And one rule that we maybe could have added that you could also add if you choose to, it's whenever the score plays, because it's so iconic and recognizable as soon as it hits.
Especially, I think it would just definitely like up that total.
Yeah, it definitely would increase it by a decent amount, because we do hear the score quite often.
Yeah. Now, speaking of the score, I feel like it's one of the strongest parts of the movie.
I agree. And fun fact, it actually doubled the salary of the composer, which was Bernard Herrmann.
Yeah.
So just the fact that Alfred Hitchcock thought it was so good that he doubled the salary for the composer is it's unbelievable to think about.
So I guess one example is in the shower scene. Alfred Hitchcock originally wanted no music for it. And then they added in the score and he's like, okay, yeah, we're doing that.
Yeah, Bernard Herrmann ended up going behind Hitchcock's back and just adding it in because he thought it would be better. And I think it was better.
Yeah. Well, like Hitchcock heard
Even
it and he's
Hitchcock
like,
thought,
yeah, even Hitchcock agreed. Even in Alfred Hitchcock's, one of his other films, The Birds, there was no score for that one at all. So, like, you know that he doesn't need a score to kind of succeed with a film.
Yeah. But I think the score for this movie definitely helped its success, for sure. Didn't necessarily need it, but it helped it.
Oh, helped it a lot, I think.
Yeah. So it's worth noting that this movie was made in 1960 when horror movies were not very popular. Like, you kind of had Frankenstein up to this point, Dracula, even Godzilla, I guess. But there wasn't a whole lot of horror at this point in time. I guess there were some exceptions, like House on Haunted Hill, House of Wax, anything with Vincent Price, really.
Yeah, anything with Vincent Price and started with House.
Yeah, pretty much. And something else worth saying about this is Alfred Hitchcock didn't want anybody to know it was a horror movie. He actually was trying to get people to believe that it was a crime or mystery or, you know, something along those lines.
Yeah.
And he even told audiences at the movie, like, do not go and tell your friends or family what happens in this. He wants everyone to be shocked. And at this point in time, it was extremely shocking to see a woman get murdered in cold blood in her shower.
Yeah. I
And-
actually didn't know that. I didn't know that at all.
Yeah. And I guess it goes into the point that this movie's kind of a character study, and they make that abundantly clear in the closing scene when
Yeah,
Hitchcock.
when there's like 5 minutes of dialogue explaining what Norman Bates is or has become.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Nowadays, that's obviously not needed, and it's kind of implied throughout the movie.
Yeah.
And it is implied throughout the movie in this as well, but it was so out of the blue and unexpected for audiences that Hitchcock felt it was necessary to go and explain to them how this was like, you know, Norman had split personality or
Yeah,
whatever.
it just wasn't really done in film up until this point.
Exactly.
But yeah, I feel like this movie, in saying that, like really impacted a lot of other movies. Like even like Saint Maud, I know, kind of has like a character development or character story towards it with psychological problems. Even speaking of like other films that it really had a big impact on, like obviously it had a big impact on Halloween.
Oh, yeah.
Seeing as Sam Loomis in both films.
That's a direct inspiration from
Yeah. Michael Myers' favorite weapon, even Eat Your Heart Out, Michael, I guess.
it. Yeah.
And even Janet Leigh's daughter, Jamie Lee Curtis, who's probably one of the more prominent female scream queens in all of horror.
Oh yeah, definitely. And yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head that Halloween definitely took inspiration from this. And the fact that Halloween had such an impact on the horror genre in itself,
Yeah.
you could kind of go back to Psycho for thanking Halloween for
Yeah.
what it did, you
It's
know?
just gonna go down a rabbit hole.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So now I just want to talk about the acting in the movie, I guess. My opinion is that Anthony Perkins was the best actor in the movie.
Oh, yes.
Like, he did such a good job in, you know, he kind of portrayed this awkward person that didn't really know how to act in front of people, but he was also like charming in a way, but
Yeah.
then there was still something slightly off, and you could tell that something was off, because he would just kind of snap and go into these, I don't know, he was almost angry, especially when Marion was talking about his mother. He kind of just snapped.
Yeah.
And you see that, and it's very effective the way he portrays it.
Yeah, no, he's by far the best actor in the film. In saying that, like, the other actors are good too, like Janet Leigh, Vera Miles, super good actors.
Yeah, and even Sam, played by John Gavin, he was fine. Like, I don't think there was any bad actors
No,
in the
definitely
movie.
not.
Especially for the ones that we focused on. And Detective Arbogast, he was another one who did a good job in his role. So, like, the acting was good. It just, at Anthony Perkins stood out, I guess. As
Oh
Norman
yes.
Bates.
So in saying that, what did you think about the film?
I thought this movie was really good, actually. Like, it's a solid film. It has good acting. It's so iconic, especially for me being such a horror fan.
Yeah.
It's definitely, you definitely need to watch Psycho to kind of understand where horror came from. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Obviously, Psycho wasn't the first horror movie, but it's one of the pioneers of the genre by far. I do understand that a lot of people could be put off from it because it is from 1960 and it's in black and white, which actually was a choice by Hitchcock, but that's aside. So I could see why people are turned away from it, but I really recommend that anybody watches this, especially if they're a fan of horror.
Definitely. And it goes to show like why it's rated one of the highest movies on IMDb. I think it's the second highest horror film besides Silence of the Lambs, I believe.
Yeah, and I think it depends on what list you look at, because I even looked at the highest rated horror movies yesterday, and Psycho was number 1.
Yeah.
And Rosemary's Baby was number 2. So like, yeah, some of these older horror movies are definitely iconic, and most lists that you see online are gonna have Psycho in their top 10 of all time.
Oh yeah.
So it just goes to show how iconic it is, I guess.
And finally, we come to the award ceremony, where we award one not-so-lucky nominee, the Darwin Award. This award can be given to a character that made a stupid decision resulting in them getting killed, somebody else getting killed, or simply resulting in something bad happening that could have been easily avoided. This award can also be given to a character that is just plain dumb. Here are the nominees.
Today's first nominee is Detective Arbogast for going into the Bates home alone to find Norma despite the fact that she likely killed Marion.
Second, we have Marion for being very suspicious in front of everybody, making her sick out when she wants to fly under the radar, and on top of that, stealing the money in the first place.
And finally, we have Norman Bates for literally opening a window in a fucking rainstorm. I don't know what he was thinking, but this is literally one of the biggest piss-offs in the movie.
And the winner is Marion, mainly for stealing the money. If she wanted to use the money to help out Sam, he would be the first person that they tracked down and they would both have got arrested. Marion was living in a fantasy world and her emotions overcame her.
And with all that being said, we hope you enjoyed our look into Psycho, made in 1960. If you end up playing the game alongside the movie, or if you have any feedback or suggestions, let us know in the comments below. Also, let us know in the comments if we should have added any rules to make the drinking game better paced.
Make sure to like and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next episode we have, that is going to be for It Follows. Also, just a reminder, we have been nominated for Horror YouTuber of the Month by our good friend, Horror Flicks with Nick. We will leave a link to his video nominating us, and if you want to vote for us, all you have to do is comment on Nick's video and say who you want to vote for. It would mean a lot to us if you showed your support to us, Horror Flicks with Nick, and all the other horror tubers nominated for this month.
If you want to check out our most recent video, click on the box on the top right. Or if you want to see a playlist of all the drinking games that we've made, click on the box below it. Thanks for tuning in, and this is us saying, cheers to fears.
She just goes a little mad sometimes. We all go a little mad sometimes. Haven't you?